Well, now we have Tom Clark. Tom Clark is a very special person. He is one of our school teacher storytellers, and he has taught school. He taught school for over 37 years. More than 25 of those years were kindergarten. And he was amazing. He loved how quickly young children connected to story and how comfortable children can be with retelling stories, and how they ad-lib and they adjust it and they present it as something new, acting it all out. Everything being accomplished with a sense of discovery and pure joy. So the thing that Tom shared with me, his special storytelling moment, it happened, he said 2 years ago. He said, when a former kindergarten student of mine, of his, tracked me down on Facebook, and she shared one of her favorite stories that she remembered almost word for word from her kindergarten days about 30 years ago. So you know that he must be amazing to have made those type of memories. So please enjoy as we listen to Tom Clark and we make more memories with him right here, right now, when the roads went out.
When I was 6 years old, my family and I moved from the inner city of Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities, about 30 miles north to a very rural, very isolated farm area. We moved from relative comfort, I would think, that is, indoor plumbing, we had electricity, and we had heat in our house, and we moved to an old farmhouse on an old kind of tattered farm, and we did have electricity. It was made by a wind charger out in the yard, which was nice. But we didn't have indoor plumbing, and all we had for heat was the big wood stove in the kitchen. So it was a very different kind of circumstance. And even bigger for my sister, who was 6 years older than I, and myself, was the adjustment to school. Because when we lived in the Twin Cities, we went to big city schools, and they were huge schools. I think my kindergarten class had approximately farm where we moved to was just down the road about half a mile from the nearest school. It was a one-room country school with all 8 grades and 1 teacher in one room. A big difference. Having had 30 kindergartners in my class, I was interested when I went to the one-room country school and discovered that in first grade I would have one other student in that grade. So there were 2 of us in first grade. And Michael Lonsky and I went to school together for a long time. But so that was a big change in our lives. But what was interesting to us was our transition. My sister Cora was, as I said, 6 years older than I, and she was going into 6th grade, and it was a real adjustment for her at first, to get used to being in such a small school setting. adapted fairly well, I think. But then what happened was we would walk to school down the road that went by our house and farm, went right past the school. It was a real solid road because it was solid red clay. And clay, as you probably know, when it dries out, it's really solid and hard and makes good solid roads. But from the very beginning of school, in that school, kids would started to talk about a time in the spring when the roads would go out. Now that confused me. I was 6 years old. I had heard my sister, who was 6 years older, begin to talk about a time when she could go out, and I think I knew what that meant. And I know my dad still worked in the northern part of the Twin Cities, and when he came home from work, my mom would complain if he went out to Happy Corner, the bar on the corner in now then, Minnesota, which he had to supposedly go by when he was coming home. But I didn't know how a road could go out. But at any rate, we went on. That wasn't going to happen, they said, until spring, and this was fall, and we were just getting used to school and helping Mrs. Eloise Holst, our teacher. And we enjoyed that. I enjoyed it especially because when you're in first grade and you do all of your first grade work and the other first grader isn't quite done, so you help him finish his work. And then when both of you are done, you get to go help the second graders do their work. And then you get to go help the third graders. Some days, by the afternoon, I was working with the eighth graders, doing science projects and all sorts of things. So it was very interactive. And Mrs. Holst was a magician at making that happen, I thought. Anyway, as time went on, we had a lovely fall, a terrible winter in Minnesota then. I remember 3 or 4 foot snow drifts, and so the winter was really a grueling one that I remember. And as time went on, we got closer and closer to spring, and more of the other students began talking about when the roads would go out. And so it still puzzled me. And so I began to ask around about that, but nobody really could tell me much until the time arrived in the late winter and the weather began to warm up and the snow began to melt. And when it all melted away, then you could tell as we walked to school that the road, which was made of clay, was getting softer and softer and softer. And finally, they canceled school because the roads had gone out. And so that was exciting. No wonder. I was thrilled. So school was out for one day, and then the second day it was out, and then a strange thing happened. My mother got bitten, I think, by a cleaning bug, because she gathered my sister and I together, and she got out the mops, and she got out the brooms, and she got out the dust cloths, and we were scrubbing every surface and cleaning every window, and it was chaos in our house. I mean, it was crazy. And then all of a sudden, we realized that we were hearing something out on the main road. We were hearing a tractor. Now, there hadn't been cars or tractors on the roads for several days, because every time you would drive on the clay roads, everybody would sink in. So they weren't driving on them. And so my sister and I ran to the door, opened the door, and looked out, and there was a huge green Oliver tractor coming down the road, spitting mud in all directions from those huge wheels. And it wasn't a little red farmall tractor like we had. It was a big green Oliver tractor, and it turned and came right up our driveway. And Cora and I are looking at each other like, who is that? What is... And then it pulled right up in front of our house, and we didn't recognize the gentleman driving the tractor, but as it pulled past, we could see, holding on for dear life, at the back of the tractor was Mrs. Eloise Hulse, our school teacher. She had come to stay at our house, because we were the closest one to the school, so that she could open the school and have classes again. So we were thrilled, because Mrs. Holst was going to be at our house, and no wonder the cleaning bug bit my mother. And so now we were leaping into action, my sister and I, to help Mrs. Holst prepare for school. And every night after school, we would get to plan the lessons for the next day and continuing on. And a couple of times I even got to help with the 8th grade science lessons. Thank you very much. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful week when Mrs. Holst lived with us and stayed with us. It was delightful. But then, toward the end of the week, she began to tell us, little by little, that her husband was coming back to get her at the end of the week. And the following week, we would be able to go back to school. But it was an interesting time for me, because there I was in 1st grade, and a strange thing happened right here in my heart. Because right there, a teacher was born. I decided when I was in 1st grade, and I got to help Mrs. Holst plan the lessons and do all the things for school and correct papers. Ooh, that was big. That I was going to be a teacher. The first person in my family to ever go to college and graduate and become a teacher, all because the roads went out.
From one teacher to another. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that personal story that you shared with us. And it just helps us to appreciate even more so the relationships that can develop between a student and a teacher, and the legacies that can be created. And we know that even though your mother got the cleaning bug, we were fortunate that you got the teaching bug. So thank you very much. That was a great, great, great story. One more round of applause. There we go.